Ableton Live 11.3, there's a new synthesizer called Drift. And Drift is meant to be extremely expressive and to capture the inconsistencies and warmth of real analog hardware synthesizers. And if you've paid any attention to the sound design work I've done in my hundreds of Ableton Live packs over the last few years, then you can probably guess that I love Drift. I've been designing my own presets for Drift for the last couple weeks, and it's incredible. Right now you're hearing me improvise on some of those presets I made with Drift. I've got a free pack of 10 presets that you can have for your music over at brianfunk.com/drift. It even includes a 16-pad drum rack where each drum sound is made up of a Drift preset. But I actually made 50 different presets. And all 50 of those presets are only available to members of my music production club because you guys are my biggest supporters. Members of the music production club always get my newest creation as soon as it's released. My educational materials, including video courses, my books, helpful PDFs, and they're part of a really cool, supportive community of fellow music makers. And I love that community. We have a Discord server where I get to hear people's music. We get together and hang out for live Zoom meetings, share our music, share tips, do projects together. It's so much fun and really exciting and inspiring for me to share this community with everybody. And there's also bonus materials for the Music Production Club, which are basically just free stuff from my store that I put on there every once in a while. So if you want to get all 50 of these Drift presets, sign up for the Music Production Club at brianfunk.com/MPC. I'm really proud of these presets. They're so expressive and deep, and some of them have maybe a reverb or a delay on them, or maybe an arpeggiator, but almost all of them are just Drift itself without any effects. It's amazing what you can do with this synthesizer, and I had a lot of fun making these sounds. And I think they're going to work really nicely in all kinds of different music genres. So if you want to get your hands on 10 free Drift presets, go to brianfunk.com/drift. If you want all 50, join the club. brianfunk.com/MPC. Thanks a lot and enjoy this episode of the Music Production Podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. And on today's show, I have David Gebroe. And Dave hosts Discograffiti. It's the podcast about the deepest dive you can get on any artist's discography. I think the catchphrase is it gives Gen Xer music nerds a chance to smell like Teen Spirit again, which I think is cool. I've always wanted to have like a cool catchphrase for this show, but I haven't come up with anything that fun. Dave has been hosting the show for a few years now. He quit his job as a licensed hearing instrument specialist, which I'm interested to talk about, actually. He's been music critic, and he's written 2 feature films, The Homeboy and Zombie Honeymoon, which is another fun thing you get to learn about people as you set up for these podcasts, which I think we're going to have a lot about that sort of thing to discuss with each other, one podcast host to another. So Dave, it's really great to have you here. Thanks for coming on the show.
Brian, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for getting back to me pretty quickly, which, I know how busy you must be. So that wasn't lost on me to hear back from you so quickly. Oh yeah. Well, I was excited to talk to you. Once I started diving into your show, I was like, yeah, this is a fun guy to talk to, especially I really appreciate about your show, which is a little bit different than mine, is the amount of research that must go into it and planning to put these things together, because you really are taking an artist's life's work and trying to distill it down, rating the albums, coming up with interesting background stories. I can't imagine that information is all just sitting in your head ready to go before you start these shows. So I really respect the amount of work you put into it. Thanks, man. I mean, it's even if I am incredibly familiar with the work, as I promised in the intro, I'm always re-listening because when you sit down and listen to an artist's, the entirety of their output versus casual listening to an album, you really are able to glean an understanding about that person's work and their perspective on this earth in a way that generally supersedes the ability of the artist to understand it.
because you're cramming it all in at once. And there's, for me, like a eureka moment where I feel like if I'm doing it right, like if I'm really letting it all storm down at once, where I'm like, oh, I get it. I get it. Even if I had listened to all of it before, you take it all in at once and you get that lightning bolt thing.
Yeah, you know, I was talking to somebody on this podcast about this at one point where there's something kind of interesting when you go through the time period with the artist and you experience it in real time. You know, you get their debut album and then you go through the whole catalog. But there's also something kind of cool when you look back, you know, and for me, that's happened with like a lot of bands, the Beatles. You did one on the Velvet Underground, which was like that for me, you know,
Yeah.
all before my time. But I got a sense of this like big perspective, big picture. And I think you're right. I think that's probably something the artists themselves don't even get a chance. There's so many things the artist never gets to do, right? Like they don't get to see like their big picture in one shot like that. They don't get to hear their songs for the first time. It's all comes together in stages. But that's a really interesting take on it to get. And that's something that you seem to draw out. I think you said in the description of the show, you're going for like a higher truth when you do
Absolutely.
these deep
And I
dives.
know how pompous that sounds. Believe me, I'm from New Jersey. You're in Long Island, so pomposity doesn't sit well in our region. It's typically stamped out quick. But for for me, music became a huge motivating force when I was younger, and now that I'm 51, it somehow, against all odds, has become even more meaningful and more of a motor or rudder in my life. You know, the show at first, probably, I'm guessing for you too, was a lark. You know, hey, it'd be cool to do this. And then it became like, no matter how impossibly difficult this is, you know, I'm going to keep going no matter what. And, you know, I think what it comes down to, you know, because every day there's a million reasons for you and I both to give up what we're doing. But at the end of the day, I'm going to keep listening to music exactly how I listened to it for this show, even if I wasn't doing the show. But if I don't have a show and I'm listening to music like I currently am, that makes me either a loser or a homeless person, because it takes so much energy to do it the way I'm doing it. I need the show to justify my behavior.
I know that feeling. That's been a great way to justify all the tinkering with sound and noise that I like to do, is that in some way making it a type of job that it justifies it a little. I'm working now instead of I'm fooling around. I'm playing.
Yeah. I mean, you know,
That's funny. And
do you have kids?
no kids.
No kids. Okay, so I have a 4-year-old.
kids.
So it's
Married, no kids. Yeah.
I with a 4-year-old, it's, you know, it definitely could get dicey. Like, you know, if I don't have a show, how could I say, you know, honey, please, I just have, you know, 4 more, you know, David Pajo solo records to go before I can feed our child. It doesn't fly if you don't have a show.
Right. Especially in that situation, right?
Yeah. But one thing I just want to add, only because it was so much work to actually do all this stuff, is that I wrote, produced, and directed my features. I didn't just write them. So, and that's also, I think, psychologically, like a really crucial element in for me understanding why I'm doing this, because I wrote, produced, and directed 2 films. Well, the first one I just produced and directed, but Zombie Honeymoon I wrote, produced, and directed, and then my third one, which, you know, not coincidentally, is a music related horror film about a psychedelic rock band. It took forever to try to find money for it. I had John Landis on board as an executive producer. I had Elijah Wood on board looking for money with his company Spectravision, and years were going by, and I was caught in that quagmire of just looking to set up projects, and I was just another loser in LA. I was a statistic. So when I started doing the show, as difficult as it is, the fact that I'm able to churn out as much as I do, which is I do 3 episodes a week. I have no help, zero, except for a guy who, a good friend of mine who does promo art for 1 out of the 3 shows per week. Otherwise, I do it all. So, and I'm not boasting. I'm just saying, like, because I don't have to sit around and wait for money to come in, I'm making up for years of lost aesthetic time.
Right. That's a lot of work. 3 a week. I'm doing about 1 a week. And I recently started getting help with the editing. Animus Invidius, performmodule.com. Shout out to him. Carl, he does great work editing the show, and just the stuff that slows me down in the process. And my show's not very heavily edited, but still, to sit down and get an episode ready is like my day of work. You know, like we'll have a conversation, and that's often a pretty good portion of the amount of work time I have for music. And then the editing becomes like another day of my work. I don't know. If I were to do 3 a week, then that would mean 3 days to record, 3 days to edit. I'd have no time to do anything else, really.
Yeah, it's hard. This started as a lark, like, hey, this would be fun. And it started with a buddy of mine, one of my best friends on the planet who's a working musician. And when we both realized, holy shit, like, what's involved here, we promptly went in different directions, where he was like, I'm out of here. I can't do it like you're doing it. Because with the Velvet Underground one, that was because Anthony Fantana was the guest on that one. All of a sudden we had an audience about 6 months into doing it. And, for me, I was like, all right, how do we take this to the next level? And he's like, next level? We're just having a good time. Bye. So I had to learn how to record, how to edit. I didn't, as a filmmaker, I knew that stuff conceptually, but I'd never used Logic. I've never, just purely edited waveforms. So, but as far as, the meaning or the import behind doing something like this, or actually, I don't consider what I do content, because content just strikes me as I'm just filling up space. To me, this is the higher truth aspect. What I do is, generally the setup of the show is I take a guest, usually a musician, but it could be an author. I take their favorite band and we go through everything they've ever done. It's a completist's dream come true. And we rate everything from 0 to 5. The crazier the fraction, the better. I love using sixteenths. And a lot of work goes into it. It's not just for ironic distance. And so then we go through everything they've ever done and try to reach a higher understanding. But one thing that's been super helpful for me in my interview style is when we're talking about another band and when we're giving stars, it immediately takes whoever it is that I'm talking to and melts them down into the fanboy they were when they were a kid. So when I detect that the walls are fully down, that's when I swing into the personal interview. And so I'm generally, and it's not like, all right, we're going to start our interview now. I'll just start asking him questions and I will then hack that part off and that becomes a separate show.
Right. Oh, cool.
And I love that because down deep, we're all like, the nervous fanboy who, at least I am, who's still nervous to approach the lip of the stage and talk to their musical idol, although they're probably more nervous than I am to speak to me.
Yeah.
But it's been an incredible thing connecting with all these people who've been so important to me through the years. Your music taste is pretty far ranging, right?
Yeah, definitely pretty wide, and it's gotten wider the more I get into producing music. Because what one nice thing that happened once I started recording and trying to learn new techniques was that I started to appreciate genres that I didn't before, just for the techniques of the production. It was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, I wasn't like following like the top 10 pop charts, but from a production standpoint, there's a lot of really cool stuff going on. Maybe I'm not so into like the subject matter, the music necessarily, but as far as production wise goes, there's a lot. It's cutting edge when you start listening to like what's going on in pop, just as far as making things slick and smooth and what's trending, what's happening. But my background is rock music. I started playing guitar as a kid in the 90s, learning Nirvana and grunge and, Weezer, Green Day, all that kind of stuff.
Who's the greatest producer that ever lived?
Oh, man.
You have this answer at the ready. You're pretending
no,
to search
I
for
don't.
No?
No, no, I don't. I don't always think like that either.
Well, let me ask you this. Are you what appeals to you more, the utilitarian aspect of an engineer's style like a Steve Albini, or the florid approach of like a Norman Smith, or like the Sgt. Pepper era, where it was about like rotating Leslie cabinets and all kinds of shit like that?
But both, it depends. Like I'm playing in a 3-piece rock band right now, and it's very garage punkish. So, put up the mics and let's get something raw and dirty, Steve Albini style. It doesn't make sense for us to go and overproduce. And that's exactly what we ran into with our album when we recorded it. Is like, I've got all this experience now, especially compared to in the past, and I've got all these synthesizers and I know all these production tricks. Like, are we gonna make this like a real ornate thing? And it was like, no, we want it to sound like a band. So that guided our approach. So we would have been much happier with somebody that was more like putting a mic up in the room and just trying to get a good sound.
Right.
But I love the other stuff too, like what Phil Spector or George Martin would do back in those days is incredible. I think it really depends on the project and the song. And even you could take a band like the Beatles, and some of their stuff, like the Sgt. Pepper stuff, is amazing. But I also love just hearing their live shows and just to hear how much energy they had. They were like,
we're taping, today's Monday, June 26th. 60 years ago today, they wrote She Loves You.
Wow.
Yeah.
60. Wow. How about that? It still holds up.
It really does. There's certain of their songs that feel like it embodies the Beatlemania aspect. You can hear it. Like the one I think that really punches me in the throat with regard to hear it. You can almost hear 1,000 Girls Running Down the Street is It Won't Be Long. It kicks off like it just bolts right out of the gate, and everything's so fast, and it feels like this is not, even their love songs are not directed at one person. They're directed to gigantic crowds of screaming people.
Yeah, and when you hear them play, it's lost a little bit in the fidelity of those recordings. They don't really capture the heaviness of the drums and the bass. But if you pay attention, they're really playing hard. They're smashing. Ringo's bashing away. He's got all his cymbals going all the times. They're screaming half the time too. It's almost like some of the harder music that came out later when you hear it in those contexts. You just have to kind of remember that the recording isn't quite capturing all that information.
If you hear some of the shows that they did toward the end, I have a bootleg, a pretty shitty quality bootleg of the Candlestick Park show, which is the last one they ever did in August '66. And they had no monitors. They couldn't hear themselves play. And yet they were perfectly in time, as if, they couldn't be out of time. That wasn't even a possibility. And the songs sound great under all the screaming. I'm thinking specifically of Nowhere Man. I mean, it's crazy they were able to pull off any kind of a performance.
Harmonies in that song, yeah.
They didn't hear themselves at all.
Right. Well, they really went through the ringer. They were playing in Germany, on uppers for like 12 hours straight. Really unhealthy way to do it, but they really got their in war-torn, post World War II Germany, in the rubble. They are out there all night long, 20 years old or so.
They weren't just on speed. They were drunk too.
Yeah, they were just
they
all
were
kinds
all
of
blitzed, yeah.
all kinds of help, to keep them going for that. But I mean, that's how you learn. That's how you get to play, especially with other people. Like after a while, you start to understand how they move and how they flow, and you just feel it, and you move together with the people you play with, and they just have that. And I think that's sometimes I don't think they get enough credit for that, just how good of a band they were.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, they're the first memory I truly have. It's like blackness, and then all of a sudden the light switches on, and I'm looking at the back cover of Sgt. Pepper. That's the first thing I remember. And I remember looking at all their record covers and looking at them like they were gods, like it was Mount Rushmore, like especially with the Beatles or Meet the Beatles.
Yeah.
That incredible shot, which is heavily influenced by, the photography that Astrud was doing and all their, super artsy friends in Germany. Some beautiful shots that, my mind would go in a loop. I remember being like 2-3 years old, being like, these people are gods. It really had a profound effect on me. They're not my all-time favorite group is the Beach Boys, but the most profoundly meaningful push into music and understanding the depth, the impossible, boundless depths that music had to offer for me was the Beatles.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I had that feeling a lot about just rock stars in general. I think maybe my brother is 9 years older than me, so he's like a teenager when I'm first like becoming self-aware, and he's got all this music coming out of his room, blasting, getting yelled at to turn it down. And to me, like the people I saw on MTV, the posters I saw in his room, it wasn't something like anybody could do. It never occurred to me that if I got a guitar, I could learn how to play these songs. Or if I got drums, I could learn how to play. It really wasn't until I was a teenager that I realized that. And realizing that was so revelatory, just an epiphany, that it really, I think, carried me through all the difficulties of actually learning the guitar and how much it hurts your fingers, you suck, it sounds terrible. But the excitement that like, holy crap, I could play these songs. I thought you had to be struck by lightning on a mountaintop, to get these like powers ordained to you. So I had the same thing. It was like they were just like not even human.
Yeah. Yeah, because especially I took guitar lessons. I had a hippie guitar teacher who basically said, anything you want to know how to play, just let me know. Any particular songs. So, man, I was so psyched. And I was decent for a little kid, but when it got to bar chords, my little fingers couldn't handle it, man. I was suffering.
Yeah.
So, I wish
is one of those hurdles that some people just don't get over.
Yeah. I didn't get over that.
Especially when you're young, and, smaller hands can be really tough. And a lot of times you're learning on a cheaper guitar that's a little harder to play to begin with.
Yeah, I learned on a Spanish nylon string guitar, and still to this day, I prefer the warmth of the nylon stringed. But I can't really, I was decent at reading music at that time. Now I I can't.
Yeah.
But I listen to so much music that it becomes difficult to create it. So, but the inception of this thing has been strange. If I can, ineloquently switch topics here.
Please.
So again, like for you, I'm guessing a lark entranceway into this thing, and then this was, my show started after yours. The idea came during the pandemic, and the idea was really just how I listen to music. There's no change. I mean, for many, many years, I would not just sit down and listen to an album. I would have several different, what I would call trawls. So my friend Joe, who initially was the co-host, would ask me, what trawls are you doing right now? And we would talk about, whatever incredible introductions I had to whatever work, big John Coltrane, going through all of John Coltrane's work, Van Morrison, whatever it was, but it wasn't for an audience. It's just my own, a gaggle of psychiatric conditions that conspired so that I couldn't just sit down and listen to one fucking album like a normal person. And then he said, well, why don't we do a show that's about that? It's apparently a no-brainer to get a huge podcast going. So I took that all the way to the bank,
Hit record.
Yeah. So from that moment forward, what happened was I got cancer, kidney cancer. Then I was immediately diagnosed with severe spinal stenosis. They did an operation through here, and 10 days later, I couldn't move my left arm, and my symptoms were much worse. It turns out that there was there were problems with the surgery. They had to go back in the back, and I was off work for a year, and I had to learn how to walk again. I had to wear a neck brace for 6 months. Then my wife was let go from her job. And, we're in the midst of the pandemic. We have no idea what's going on at this point. And then I'm also type 1 diabetic, and all of the uncertainty led to crazy insomnia, where every single day I'd be waking up between midnight and 2 a.m. Then and I would just wake up, work on the podcast all night, then go to work, where I worked as a licensed hearing instrument specialist. At first, I would just try to make it through the day. But then it just became like, what? This is, my thinking got completely shifted. And I started working not just all night on the podcast, but all day too. So if I was approached with a work-related matter, I would get palpably and visibly irate. It doesn't help that I'm getting no sleep, but now I'm really focused. Now it's like, it really kind of started with when I was on my own, when I was no longer with my co-host, and I did an 8-hour interview with Bob Nastanovich from Pavement, and became obsessed with taking out every and That screwed me. So I basically just, I kind of talked myself mentally out of a job, out of a career, and decided that, the proof of concept, the audience kept growing, and I was like, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to go for it. So I went from, really, really struggling to make ends meet, even with a good job, to now I'm making less than $1,000 a month. During that, initial phase where, I have a Patreon and I have people who are in it, and a decent sized amount for a new show. The show's only been going for a year and a half. Patreon's only been in existence for 9 months. But it's a kamikaze mission now. And my wife and myself and our 4-year-old, we left the West Coast in January before we even sold the house. We were just like, this is not working because I can't, even when things are going great, it's just a question of how fast are we going to sink in the quicksand? Or are we going to slow it down this month? So we drove across country. thank God we were able to sell the house, and we're living on the East Coast right now with my parents, and we have a house in Vermont that was an Airbnb thing. We're going to be there this summer, and I'm gunning it for this thing to be, what it deserves to be, which is the fucking standard bearer on all things that are cool and worthwhile about music, just like your show.
Damn. So that a lot of shit happened at once, huh?
Yeah, and also
Wow.
a few weeks ago, I had another operation that I needed to do a while ago, but the recovery was looking grim and difficult. So I put it off to when I got here to New Jersey, and then when I did that, there was a complication with that surgery, and I came very close to bleeding to death.
Really?
That was several weeks ago.
I think you did a podcast on that.
Yeah,
I didn't listen to that one yet, but I saw
I've never
the intriguing title.
Yeah, I've never missed a single week with 3 shows a week. The week I almost bled to death, it was 4 shows that week. There's
Wow.
something very wrong with me. I'm sure you can empathize to some extent.
Well, I mean, I guess it puts an importance on doing what you love to do, right? I mean, that's what it sounds like to me, that you just, were saddled with all this stuff happening at once that, I got to spend my time how I want to spend it in a way that means something to me.
Yeah, that's why I don't consider it content. I mean, what I'm really gunning for is some kind of higher understanding, because ultimately, with all the mortality that I've been confronted with, and there's a lot more. I'm just kind of giving you bullet points, but for me, I'm thinking about what I'm leaving behind. For my son, I think about, my son wanting to learn more about his dad. And so sitting down and listening to these shows and the star ratings, as much as the whole thing, it really, that is the crux of the thing. It's a diversion away from the main point, which is, why are we really doing this? Or, how old are you?
42.
42. Okay. So, the music that was meaningful to you as a kid, that was, before we even had the mechanism to ask why, why is this thing driving me? Why do I love the things I love? Now I'm very, very demonstrably looking back and trying to ask those questions, but not just of myself, the people who were making that music back then that was doing those things to me. People like Lou Barlow, from Dinosaur Jr. and Sebadoh, David Pajo talking about Slint, really positioning the question to them, were you feeling the same things that I was getting from what you were producing at that time? And I think I don't think that question's really asked very much. And I think, a lot of, I think it's customary that an interview would be approximately an hour long. But what happens if you tell somebody, hey, it'll be an hour, knowing full well that you plan to keep them on the phone for 8 hours? Have you ever been in that position?
That long? Not that long. Though there have been, every once in a while, I always tell the guests, we'll say hello. I forgot to tell you this actually, but we'll say hello in the beginning. We kind of talk, we explain what's going on, get on the same page. And then we'll say goodbye to the audience, kind of like a Hollywood goodbye. And then we'll wrap up afterwards in case there's anything we need to talk about, anything that needs editing or whatever. And occasionally that wrap up winds up going on and on and on too, because I guess you noticed this too when you mentioned it, alluded to it a little before, that there is like a warm up period that happens, and it's the guest's comfort, it's my comfort with the guest, it's this kind of time it takes to forget that you're recording a podcast, and then things start becoming a little more open and fluid, and then sometimes once you actually end the podcast, now the connection has been made and no one's listening, it sometimes continues on. I mean, sometimes there have been certain times where I kind of wished we didn't hit the end button, you know,
Yeah.
where some of the good stuff happens there. But it's something that happens when you just sit down with somebody for this extended period of time. That's so unusual in routine life nowadays, to just sit down and talk. Your show reminded me of being a teenager. And a couple summers in high school, a buddy of mine, his family would rent out a campsite on Montauk, Hither Hills. So it's a very popular place to go camping, right on the beach in Montauk on Long Island. And we'd go camp out, and there'd always be like a couple nights where we'd sneak off and build a bonfire. And then we'd have these like conversations about like the bands we like, the movies we like, the comic books. And they were really, you know, at the edge of our intellectual capabilities and very just kind of opinionated, sometimes just arguing. But
Yeah.
they were really fun conversations to have in a time when you didn't have forums, you didn't have chat rooms or anything that we have nowadays.
You're kind of on the cusp, though. I mean, you were born what year?
80.
80. Okay, so yeah, you as a teen, you're going, yeah.
The first time I ever saw the internet was, I was like a ninth grader, and it was so new. It was America Online, and you were unplugging the phone, and you couldn't really do anything on it.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I'm really glad I got to see that change, just to understand what the world was like before it. But yeah, it was, those were fun times where you got to learn about each other, you know, and what was important to each other. And I think your show is sort of like the modern version of those types of times, you know, staying up late with your friends, talking about all these little details and rumors you may have heard.
Yeah.
Much more factual based now than it was back then.
Right. Yeah,
but it's got that vibe.
It definitely is consciously patterned after that. And, you know, I still have those same discussions, you know, even with the show, even more so because I try to have a hands-on relationship with my Patreon audience, because at the end of the day, the thing that is actually the most important to me, along with making this thing work, is creating a community. Because the kind of person who is my, my number one type fan does not care what the band is that we're covering week after week. It's just as much about learning about new music as it is, you know, just revisiting the stuff that we already know to be great. So, you know, to me, the most value I can possibly have in any conversation or with any, you know, type of music related piece of entertainment is how many usable suggestions do I have to discover new records or bands? No matter how great the article, the book, the movie, no matter what it is I'm indulging in, if I don't leave with you know, great ideas for downloading, then it's, you know, it could have been better. So, you know, actually, I'm doing one on an artist I had never heard of. So I kind of become an avatar for the audience. And the one the band Deer Tick, the drummer is going to be on in the next couple of weeks. And he gave me a list. They were all juggernauts like Steely Dan and Dr. John. And then there was one guy I'd never heard of named Bambino. He's a Nigerian guitarist. And I was blown away. And it's like, all right, this is awesome, because then I can, you know, I don't have to be a resident expert. I can be the guy who's discovering it right along with you, and I'll give you my thoughts in real time.
Yeah.
And it's become a marvelous opportunity, because something like Velvet Underground, you know, I've been knowledgeable about it for a long time. And so I'm just trying to explain what has been such a draw, has been so appealing to me, why the Velvet Underground is, you know, not just a great band, but a necessary band. I remember the very first time that I ever took acid, that night, going to sleep, putting on Sister Ray to go to sleep to. And I feel like that did something to me, like in a hardwired way.
Rearrange some wires.
Yeah, it did. It did in all the best possible ways.
I like that you take that approach of not having to be the expert. I mean, that's got to be so liberating, first of all. As like a teacher, I teach high school English by day. That's my grown-up job. And I also teach music production, but I don't know everything about anything. So I think when I was younger, the temptation was to try to establish, like, I know I deserve to be here, So learning to just say, I don't know. I never heard of that. I'm not sure. So liberating. And it made me such a better teacher too, because then I would go on and learn these things instead of pretending and then running away from it as fast as we could.
Yeah.
You would go in and you would experience it, like you said, like the audience or the class, say, and go through it together. And it's such a better experience than trying to pretend to be, something that you're not, or trying to work up to it like overnight.
I love the idea of, I don't know if this is an appealing aspect of your show to you, but the idea of trying to crack the code on every episode. It sounds like you approach each show fresh and just kind of roll with it. But, and I'm not sure if that's the case, but for me, I feel like I'm trying to solve a riddle before I actually get on the line with somebody. Feels like there's a twist for every episode that'll make it unique instead of just being just a format plugging slab of content.
Yeah. I definitely do research on my guests and their work and get familiar with what they're doing. And I'll often come up with questions and curiosities through that, but it's not, I'm rattling off a list of questions here. It's I got some bullet points, some things that might come up.
Were you an interviewer before the show?
Oh, no.
No.
So I think for me, my approach to the show might have been a little different than yours, because it wasn't exactly, in a way it was on a lark, but it wasn't, because I thought about this show for like years before I started it. And it was going to have these segments. I had all these ideas, video portion, tutorial here, and then a sound design thing, and that'll be like the theme music. The show just got too big for me that I didn't know how to start it. It became too big of a project, And
are you talking about conceptually?
Yeah. I had all these, I had like notes and all this, what this show is going to be. But the way it got started was sort of on a lark, because one day I just said, let's just see if I can actually even talk for long enough to do this. You know what I mean? I didn't know if I could do it. But it's funny because it turns out as I started recording the ones that I do by myself, they almost all wound up roughly around 40 minutes long, which is how long like a class period is at school. So I'm just like a 40-minute at a time person, I guess.
That's pretty good for doing a solo show. I tend to run short on a solo thing.
Well, I guess I'm good at dragging things out.
If you can expound interestingly, hey, that's pure gold, man.
Yeah. But it was a little nerve-wracking to have guests, though. I didn't know if I could hold a conversation that long. But it's curiosity, I guess. And like you, there is a little bit of like cracking the code. I have these ideas of what we're going to talk about and things I'm curious about. But part of the reason I like to keep it a little bit loose is because a lot of times the thing that becomes sort of the theme, almost like the title of the episode, is not in my notes.
Right.
It just comes up along the way.
Right.
And just kind of, you're exploring, you're feeling for that as you go.
It's funny. If I really, I can usually tell when I have my head up my ass, when I'm listening back to an episode, because I'm trying to make it into the thing that it is or was in my head before I got to the mic.
Yeah.
And I can hear myself sometimes not listening and thinking about I can hear myself thinking about the next thing I'm going to say. That's more early on. I'm trying to keep that kind of stuff at bay because, like you said, or if I can paraphrase, like the miracle happens if you get the hell out of the way with your ideas about it.
Yeah.
Same with making music. I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah,
And
there's
anything
parallels.
creative.
Yeah, I've gone the same way where I notice I'm just planning what I'm going to say next. It's made me hyper aware of that when I'm having real life conversations, like in person, casual conversations, when I realize, all right, they're just getting ready to say what they're going to say next. And I guess I've lost a little patience for those interactions along the way.
Yeah.
But you're right about the music connection, which I kind of never thought of, because if you're trying to make the interview, the conversation into something, you're grabbing the wheel a little too much. You can lose it, and it doesn't become anything sometimes. And same thing with writing a song. Sometimes you have to sort of like let the terrain turn the wheel for you a little bit instead of just forcing it, because you might often be onto something pretty interesting, but you're sort of blind to it because you're trying to steer the other way.
I think ultimately that is the main value of Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies deck, is not necessarily specifically what they impart, but dismantling your own old, tired, mold-ridden process.
Yeah, to just get you thinking in a different way.
Yeah, just differently. As long as it's not the way that you normally think, that's the only thing that matters.
Yeah, and I guess if anyone's not familiar with those cards, they're just very abstract phrases that so Brian Eno and somebody else designed them.
Yeah, I can't remember who the other person was, but if you're listening to this show,
You might know about
you
it.
don't know what that is, the fuck is wrong with you?
No, it's okay.
Sorry, I'm obviously the abrasive one here on the show.
It's okay, everybody. I didn't know about them until long after they were released. I don't even know when they were released, but
You do have a certain lulling gentleness of spirit to you.
okay.
It comes through in your voice, and so listening to your show, it's a very calming feeling.
Thanks. I think a lot of that comes from being very aware of my own shortcomings and where I've come from and how I had to get to where I am. I've always,
Where do you fall short?
well, I've just always felt like I was behind. Like people were ahead of me. They knew more. They started playing their instrument earlier than me. They've been doing it longer. They took more classes. They have more degrees. They have, you name it. Like it's not hard to find ways to feel inadequate about yourself.
You have fraud syndrome like everyone else on the planet.
Yeah,
right?
everyone.
Yeah.
And this podcast has helped me realize that I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
And all the struggles I have, people that you would never expect would have. Like, really? You're so successful. You've got all these awards and it's still hard for you? I mean, you haven't figured it out yet? It seems like you have.
I feel like the only people that don't suffer from the fraud syndrome are sociopaths.
It might be. I think because you just have
If you have no doubts about yourself whatsoever, I don't know, it just feels like an intrinsic aspect of human nature is to have that component. But maybe it's just because I'm so used to my own. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I guess you're not thinking about how other people see you as much. It's an important thing to be able to reflect on yourself in that way.
Yeah.
But it's also important not to go too far with it either.
Yeah. Yeah, like, I mean, just as a reflection of that, any of the reviews that I get for the show, I never post good ones or adulatory ones. Any 1-star reviews, which are rare, admittedly, but those I always post in the Facebook group that I have, just to make sure that I'm continue to prod my balloon with needles.
Yeah, it can be a good way to get your people to rally around you too, I bet.
I don't know, maybe not specifically that was was that the reasoning why? But I think it does have that effect, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, it's good not to take them to heart too much either, because I know I can get 10 nice things said to me and I only remember the one slightly critical thing. It doesn't even have to be like really. There's a point, I guess. If it's totally nasty and evil comment, I can let those go because it's just ridiculous. But it's the ones that I can see. I'm like, yeah, I get what he's saying. Yeah.
Yeah. He's right. I do suck.
That one sticks with you longer.
You're not brutal on yourself, though, are you?
No.
You don't seem like you are. You seem like a pretty well-adjusted person.
Thanks.
You do, are you?
I guess at times, but I think I put pressure on myself to do the work and to keep going, and
that's normal though.
In a healthy way. Though I try to notice when it's unhealthy, and I've been able to really, honestly, it's like meditation helped a lot. As funny as that can sound sometimes when people say that, but
no, I learned TM in '96, and I don't do it twice a day like I should, but it's never a bad idea to meditate.
It's just this idea of being aware of that voice in your head and what they're saying to you. 'Cause I started thinking about it like a person whispering in your ear. And if sometimes the things that get whispered in your ear to yourself, you would never say to other people. And if it was a real person, you'd throw them out of the room or something. But if you're not paying attention to it, you can really just inhabit that way of thinking about yourself. And it happened to me a lot with teaching. I would get these feelings of, like, especially if I didn't have a lesson all squared away for the next day, I'd start thinking like, who am I to be saddled with this responsibility? Who did I fool to get here? And people are leaving their children with me. And this is like the biggest fraud ever. And like, how am I? And like, it just gets into the spiral, and you just like, you're riding that train top speed. But when you pay attention to like what you're actually saying, you can say, whoa, hold on a second. These are just thoughts. I like to think of it as like a movie. I'm watching the movie called I'm a Terrible Person, and everyone's about to find out.
Right.
And I just take the movie out and put in the other movie that says, hey, you've been doing this a while. Like you've proven to yourself you know how to solve problems. And even if you cause more problems along the way, you're trying to do what you think is right. That helps a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I never catch myself, screaming, calming, and bolstering platitudes to myself. It's always, you stupid piece of shit. Why the fuck did you have to go and mess that up again? Yet again.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just know that my drive has remained unabated after all this time. So whatever, I'd like to be more at peace with that kind of stuff, but if it means, being as consistent as I have been with, not letting the important things slide away from me, I guess whatever gets me there. But it's looking like some therapy might probably be of assistance too.
Well, there's like key moments, I think, because I have that too, where like I start stressing out if I don't have like this ready for that week or this thing that it's been on my list for too long. And that can be the very thing that gets me to do my work and get stuff done. But I try to also remember, like, if I'm not working, if I'm not doing it, then I'm not doing it. So if I'm going to sit around and watch some movies on TV tonight, that's what I'm doing. And I have to like let go. I can't be sitting around watching movies feeling guilty that I'm not working, because now I'm not even really sitting there watching movies. I'm just feeling guilty. I'm not relaxing. I'm not getting the rest that I need, and I'm not doing the work. So it's like a double negative. You know what I mean? So at least if I can, in those moments, like give myself the permission so that the rest and relaxation actually counts, then when I get back into like, all right, time to do stuff mode, it's at least like a shift.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that kind of stuff and dealing with issues like that and the inability to slow down, relax. Here's today's to-do list. So
It looks mostly crossed off.
yeah, well, I mean, I like to write extra stuff so I can
And
just be
P.S.
like,
it's 11:30 a.m.
right. Yeah. And I literally have been up since 2:15. Listening to Bambino and actually listening to more of your show and a whole bunch of stuff. But
Is that a cat?
yeah, she
Yeah, cool.
literally only meows when I'm recording.
That's cats.
Yeah, that is cat. Do you have a favorite album of all time?
No,
No?
I don't. I think because so much of it depends on when and where. Man, but if you put me on the spot, what would I say? Favorite album of all time? You know what? I might go in your direction. I'll say this for the sake of this conversation anyway, because I noticed you said Beach Boys' Smile is your favorite, which I thought was really cool. Oh, you really do have the tattoo. I thought
Yeah.
that was figuratively speaking.
No, definitely not.
I might say Pet Sounds,
That's number 2. I love that one.
it's just, look, I love a lot of music that's raw and dirty and rough around the edges, but as far as like just a masterpiece, it's just so good.
It's perfect.
It's perfect. But Smile, I love a lot too. And it's kind of like, it's almost the opposite in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it really is.
It's raw, it's kind of unfinished, and it's really,
But it's also
weird.
external. So
yeah.
Pet Sounds is, the topography is all internal. But Smile, it's literally external. I mean, it's a story of America. But beyond that, I mean, side 1 would have been the story of America. And then side 2 is the Elements suite. I mean, when people say we're doing a concept album, it usually takes, like, for example, like if King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard, if they're going to explain their concept album to you, you better have 5-10 minutes, and it's still not going to make any sense. But this is a real concept that can be explained like a novel, and it's constructed like that. There is, back at a very impressionable age when there were things that set me on the course of my life, I was spending an enormous amount of time with Smile. And this is before there were any real clean edits for all the pieces, because Brian at that time was creating what he called feels. So there wasn't songs per se, it was chunks. And he would just paste them together. Obviously, it would have been, for his style of creativity at that time, it would have been very helpful if modern day recording and editing techniques were extant. But we're talking about just a razor blade.
Mm-hmm.
So, and more than that, it's the cataloging and, because there's so many moving parts. And the story goes, the popular tale is that this drug-addled maniac, got completely nuts and made this crazy record that made no sense, but he was totally on top of it. You can't invite dozens of musicians into Gold Star Recorder and not know what you're doing. He knew if he was in the middle of a take and one person was very slightly off, he would stop it and he wouldn't ask who that was. He knew. He was totally on top of things. And hearing him, I would say produce, but it's more like he's directing. He's directing the Wrecking Crew. I've had Don Randy on the show, ostensibly mainly to talk about David Axelrod, but we spent an enormous amount of time talking about Brian Wilson. And also just had a show about Jim Gordon, who was playing on Pet Sounds. So that was another thing about the Beach Boys that really was a draw for me, was the dichotomy between how they were perceived and the reality of the Beach Boys was a total mind blower. And this is, I'm getting into them in the late 80s. So they're kind of at the apex of being seen as totally uncool pieces of shit. And it's hard to argue against it because they are totally untalented pieces of shit, but they're also the greatest thing that ever happened to this planet. Both are true, and you could argue both ways, and both arguments would be right. And so that conceptually was a mind blower to me, because you look at any band, and they're either cool or they're not. They're either good or they're not. The story's a lot more difficult to parse with the Beach Boys.
They're a really cool example of the kind of big picture thing we were talking about earlier. Where you can look at them first coming out and kind of, real clean cut, singing about surfing, which was, I still think it's totally awesome. But I guess when I was growing up, I remember our class, we all learned Kokomo. We were like third or fourth grade, and for whatever reason, we did some assembly where we all sang Kokomo to the school. And that was like, as a teenager, kind of my impression of the Beach Boys. It was like old fashioned, it wasn't
the worst of the worst.
It didn't have the cool like Woodstock 60s thing going. It just had like the more kind of square thing happening. But then I heard Pet Sounds and I couldn't believe it. And that just changed everything. And then it was like, oh my God, these guys are not about that at all. Like that's just a portion of it. And it made me really appreciate the older stuff more too. I love the old original, tracks they were coming out with. But it's so cool to just hear where it goes. And even into the 70s, like it's just...
I love it. I mean, I think it's all top notch up through and including the Beach Boys' Love You. And then it kind of slides into the toilet bowl. But for a good 15 years, the output is really staggering. Even during the troubled times, late 60s, early 70s, that was a weird, awkward time for them, but the music they were making then is just as crucial to me as in a different way than Pet Sounds.
Yeah.
Like Friends, that's Brian's favorite Beach Boys record.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great album. But that was their big one for me. I mean, my favorite of all time is Smile. My second favorite is Pet Sounds.
Those are good choices. Yeah.
Like yours too.
Yeah. Well, just harmony and songwriting. I mean, that was really opened my eyes to like what was possible. Like, holy cow! Like you can write some crazy, amazing, beautiful melodies. You can do so much with it. And, clearly like one of Brian Wilson's strengths.
Yeah.
And just the timbre of them all singing together too. It's just
also
unreal.
Specifically Pet Sounds. If you listen to those backing tracks, which on the box set is,
I've got the box set.
Yeah, you can just bask
get all the
in those, or one or the
put
other.
on the vocals. Yeah.
But the coolest thing about it is if you just listen to those backing tracks and try to attempt to erase your knowledge of the top line, there's no clear top line. So he's like, I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. Probably that's my favorite song on that record. If you listen to that backing track, the top line is not clear at all.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not an element guiding you through it.
No. That guy is a stone cold genius. I mean, I've had, unexplainably moving experiences listening to the music, but even sometimes just sitting there thinking about him. It was especially palpable for me around the time when I first discovered it, because I would never come across anything like that again. The power of realizing kind of like this trapdoor in the side of music history. The what ifs were endless with Smile. If it had come out and beat Sgt. Pepper to the finish line of, the big work of The Summer of Love, my personal opinion, although you could endlessly pontificate and imagine the possible circumstances, is that it would have changed the face of music. Plus, the way that they were seen and the general public perception of them would have, never gone into that whole, annually playing at the National Monument and all the squareness that came along. They would never have to even, that would never be a thing.
Yeah.
But instead it didn't happen like that.
I don't know, like if that album would have gone there, I just don't know that like anyone else could have even tried to like copy it, because like with music, whenever a new thing comes out, everyone starts to sound like that in some way. But like, who was gonna make even like Good Vibrations, which is from those sessions, if not on, I forget if it's on the record that I have anyway, but I don't know what the original version is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a weird song, and for that to get as much airplay and become such a big hit is honestly, to me, like when I hear it now, I don't get it. I don't understand how that got on the charts. It's such a weird song.
Yeah.
But I don't recall anything trying to like go in those footsteps as well.
No.
Like a band like, yeah, let's make songs like that. Like the Beach Boys, just like, I just don't think anyone could do that.
No. I think that Kurt Becher was barking up that tree, and I think he's one of the better producers that ever was, but also extremely solipsistic, narcissistic, the kind of producer who had no choice personality-wise but to take over a band and make them his minions to do his, puppeteering stuff. So,
what band was that?
So Kurt was,
I don't know the name.
Kurt Becher was a producer who really got his feet wet. Initially he was in a group called the Goldbriars, but then he produced Along Comes Mary for the Association. That kind of put him on the map.
Oh, okay.
He was kind of like one step behind Brian Wilson. But what he had was this band called The Millennium. The Millennium created one of the greatest, definitely a contender for the greatest obscure record of all time. The Millenniums begin, I think 1968. They were kind of walk it like we talk it kind of a band. So, a lot of sort of LSD proselytizing kind of stuff, but they were living like an almost cult-like existence where the band lived together, and he would just have outside of the studio sort of task them with thought games that would keep everyone on the same page. And the music is one of those things where it's like too fucking weird for AM, but too sugary for FM. So nobody heard it. And it was the second album ever recorded to 16 track. And it sounds like just like bouquets of flowers just being poured into your ear. Every last studio trick in the universe, but done in service to the song. So very Sgt. Peppery, etc. An amazing record. Kurt,
what's that record called?
That's called Begin.
Begin.
Yeah,
okay.
But it helps.
It
it helps if you like Mamas and Papas style West Coast harmony. If you do, it's like stumbling into. It's a dream come true. It really is.
Nice. Yeah, I never heard of that.
Yeah. See, I mean, my natural inclination. The show was gaining a lot of steam. About 9 months ago, I had like the first huge series. We had Anthony Fantano on with Velvet Underground, so that helped. But then when Pavement was on, that broke the show for me for a lot of new listeners. Instead of being super smart about that and doubling down on the Gen X thing to keep pumping up that crowd, I was like, All right. So everyone wants to just find out about cool music. So I was going in all kinds of directions that before I really understood retention, I was just kind of like pasta on the walls kind of deal. And, given half a chance, this is the direction that I would wind up going in is, Kurt's got endless amounts of recordings that he worked on. And so as a completist show, I would have to talk about everything, even if only for a moment, but everything would have to be covered, which makes it harrowing to talk about certain artists.
Right.
But necessary, because I'm promising,
Yeah.
this is not a gimmick. I really hope to cover every artist and band that ever existed.
Yeah, that's a
except
tall order.
maybe Menudo.
Do you feel stressed about that promise when you embark on these?
Not about
like,
the
okay,
promise. Not
we're
about
going
the
in.
promise. Not about the promise. Every aspect of actually making the show, I love. The creation of the show, that part's awesome. It's just that there's a lot more than just that.
Are you talking about releasing, editing?
Social media.
Yeah.
The day that I post every show, there's so much involved with it. I mean, I got to figure out show notes based on, specific, enticing aspects of the content of the show. I have to pull the greatest 20 seconds in the world to put at the head of it.
Mm-hmm.
I have to, just whatever. It's kind of endless to get it out there correctly. And even then, I always feel like I could be doing something more, that I should be doing something more. That if I just did one more thing or put it in one more Facebook group or this or that, that it would make some kind of difference.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, as a filmmaker, you could be in a theater that is filled with people and they're all either laughing or screaming or there's a palpable response. Here, I'm just a douche and sitting in my chair at home. If it goes poorly or incredibly well, externally it looks the same.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
That notion kind of drives me nuts.
Yeah. Well, that's like, you playing live music. You can tell. You understand if it's working or not. You're doing it at home, you don't know. And things like this, the podcast, you put them out. And especially because it's so much talking and so many thoughts you're putting out, it's kind of natural to feel a response should be coming. But you really get very little. It's surprising. I don't know, maybe I'm not doing anything remarkable enough, but do
you have a Facebook group where there's interaction?
I don't have a Facebook group for the show, no.
That's kind of been the hub for me. So if I'm desperate, not for affirmation, I'm not looking for that.
No, but just
I want to know,
keep the conversation going.
But not just that. But if I'm working this hard on something and there's the connection's not fully made, I want to know, like, what am I doing wrong? How am I missing the mark? What's working for you guys? Because I think that stuff's important. I don't get enough time to listen to as many podcasts as I'd like.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm spinning my wheels in my own solipsistic world or if I'm optimizing.
I know that feeling, and I know it would probably be smart to cultivate a Facebook group, but it's like I just don't want to be on Facebook. I want to be like you said, I want to be doing the thing. I think most of my energy goes into just making the stuff and hoping that my little weird world, that there's enough other people that are strange enough to be interested as well. But yeah, it's...
Well, you're kicking ass, man. I mean, you're in the top 1% of all podcasts globally.
Is that for real?
You're aware of that, right?
No, I have no idea.
All right, well,
I don't even know how you would find that out.
Go on Listen Notes. Do it right now, seriously.
All right. Listen Notes, huh?
Yeah. Go on Listen Notes and look up your own podcast.
Well, See, this is a new site to me.
This rates everybody's podcast. So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want to be on your show, I've got shitloads of people listening to me, you can confirm that immediately.
What?
So listen, from here on in, when you're dealing with sponsors, when you're dealing with guests or whomever, it's a quick shorthand to get what you want.
Okay.
That's real. That's not...
This isn't just to like make me want to sign up for something.
No, it's a real...
Tell me more good news.
And I listen to your show through that site. So if you scroll down, all your episodes are down there.
I'll have to check that out. Thanks. I would say, like, if you're even doing it, I mean, just making stuff, you're in like the top 1%. You know, I mean, how many people have thought to start a podcast?
Oh, Jesus.
And or started one and done 3 episodes, or
that's almost everybody. I don't think hats off to you if you did it. I think you're cluttering the content sphere with more dog shit. If you know, I don't know about you, but it was a long time till I did my first episode because I wanted to make sure that it was not a totally awkward beginning, but that at least I had some kind of format in place that already felt crucial. Like that was just as much a part of the what made it so crucial is the flow from the different sections. But you know, it's mostly, podcasts are mostly just graveyards for shows that never truly get off the ground. Almost all of them last no longer than 6 months.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying, though. Like, the fact that anyone can do it longer than that there's an accomplishment to that. But I can understand the idea of polluting the internet a little, too.
I don't want to be part of the problem, and I don't want to make content.
Well, that's something that impressed me about your show was the structure and the way it is put together. I mean, that's stuff I really notice because that's stuff I really don't do. I don't have much of that going on. So like you do a great job introducing things. You got that nice tidbit in the beginning, the like catchy like portion, like you said, the 20-second gold in the beginning that gets people to listen.
Does the
structure
full intro feel too long to you?
No. I actually enjoy it quite a lot.
I'm always concerned.
Well, it sets up the show, and I found myself wanting to listen for the things that I know are to come. Like for my show, I know that sometimes the things that get really interesting, you would have no idea that they were coming unless you were listening to the whole thing and got to it.
Yeah.
Whereas I think you do a nice job setting it up like, oh, that's going to be a fun thing to hear about. And then but for me, I think it keeps me sticking around a little loher.
The thing that I'm most focused on, and I think the biggest hurdle that I have, is that I want in order for my show to exist on the scale at which I imagine it, people would have to listen to it every week, regardless of whether or not they like the band. So I have to find some way of selling the artist, not to the dedicated faithful, but to people who could give a rat's ass, or maybe just people who just listen to whatever's on the radio.
Yeah,
because I got to sell the story of the artist or band.
Right. A show that does that really well is Song Exploder. Mm-hmm. You familiar with Song Exploder?
Yeah. I mean, that's the top of the toppermost of the poppermost.
Yeah. And I mean, they have a lot of huge advantages with the guests they get, of course, and access to the home recordings and the stems of each track. So it's kind of interesting to begin with. But that's a show where when it comes out, I'm just like, yeah, I'm going to listen to this. I don't even care who it is. I might even see like, I don't even like this artist.
Yeah.
And they have a way of making me care about them by the time it's done and appreciating their work. And that's been a valuable experience on its own, just to, I don't know, you know, when like you're a kid especially and you're like, that band sucks. They suck. You know, like they don't suck. Like, they didn't get here sucking.
Yes, they do suck.
You might not like it, but there was something that got them there. Enough people heard something. It just doesn't work that way, you know?
My tastes have flip-flopped enough to know to temper that kind of thing, but I like using confrontational terms when talking about music.
Well, it's what's fun about it is it's so subjective, and you're allowed to just take those subjective stances.
Yeah.
Song Exploder, though, has helped me maybe objectively see what's working for these artists and what's interesting about them. So as far as that's a show that always comes to mind to me, where I'll just listen to it, even though I know I either don't like the song or I'm not interested in the artist, because I know I'll get something out of it of value.
One of the original titles for the show was going to be Objectively Speaking, just because of the passion that goes behind subjective perception of music. It does feel like fact.
Yeah.
I always try to posit my feelings as if they're truth, but just to see, I think initially to see exactly how strongly does this person, number one, can they defend if they like or hate something, or or is it just because I'll go to the mat explaining why Billy Joel's An Innocent Man is a fucking steaming pile of dung. I won't just say it sucks, because that's really, really easy. So instead, I'll do a whole episode to try to wade through, hopefully, a higher truth about low art. So that's another spin-off show that I do called Queasy Listening. And that is, I have different Patreon tiers. That one is the Lieutenant tier. And it could be an extension of that week's interview, or it could be Queasy Listening. Another show I have is Rock Cousteau. Rock Cousteau is...
These are separate podcasts?
These are sub-shows for Patreon.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So there's a couple of Rock Cousteaus and a couple of Queasy Listenings that are in the main track list.
Right.
But if you're doing Patreon, it's not just some bonus bullshit. The whole thing is structured as a weekly deep dive. So every Thursday, I'll announce the deep dive. For example, coming up, we have the week of lists. So what that is, and I'll post about it on Thursday, first show comes out on Friday, is we have the director Alan Arkish, who directed Rock and Roll High School. He's doing his 10 favorite albums of all time. So then the week then becomes lists. So the Monday show is a sub show that, it's breaking off more pieces from the Alan Arkish interview, but it's just about Alan's time working for Bill Graham at the Fillmore East. He worked in every capacity: Usher, The Light Show, you name it. He was there doing it. So then there'll be another segment called Fillmore Feast. And then on Wednesday, which is accessed only by the major tier or above, there's a third show. And then that one, I have Paul Major from the band Endless Boogie, also an extremely avid private press record collector, doing his 10 favorite private press records of all time. So depending on the level of obsession and obviously the level of monthly discretionary income, you can have the microscope punch in closer and closer.
Right.
Or you could just have the free show on Friday.
Nice. That's cool. That it gets people deeper into your world.
Yeah.
And offers a little more, depending on how obsessive you want to get.
It's obsession.
Yeah.
That's how my mind works. So I have anyone I book an interview with, the first thing I think is, how can I make a whole week-long theme out of this?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, it's fun. I love that part of it. It's great.
I would think you'd have to, right? Just to
keep the fucking plate spinning. After 9 months of this, man, 3 shows a week, literally not 1 week off. It's definitely a little much. And I'm obsessed with trying to stay 10 days ahead of things. having all the art and the shows and the text for the promos, everything ready, just to feel like the walls. I feel like in Star Wars, the trash compactor, you know?
Yeah.
No!
That's funny. Yeah, I know what you mean. And it's a hefty lift you got going to do 3 a week. I mean, to do one, right? Just with this, there's just hours of listening time alone, just right there. Never mind researching their background and their life.
Dude, a
and
good
their history.
example is the Black Sabbath show. So I had Jim Florentine from That Metal Show and Crank Yankers. He was the guest for Sabbath. And before I edited the notes down, my notes for Black Sabbath were 91 pages. So that's not, I'm doing a school right now that is helping me with, the back end and trying to maximize listeners and retention. But, they're pushing things like use Chat GPT to get your note. I'm coming at it from the other end completely, which is a journey, make a journey out of it.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know how dumb or smart that is, but depending on the day, it vacillates wildly between those two poles.
Well, I could see it both ways, I guess. But it prevents you from making content, I guess.
Yeah.
Because you're along for this journey and you're going through it. You're not just trying to get this thing out because you're doing 3 a week. You're going on the trip. You're there. And that comes through in it. I mean, there's no denying it that when you listen to your show, it's like you're in the middle. Maybe it's a little bit towards the end actually, based on all the research you do, but you've collected a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of listening data as well, and just now it's all coming out. And it's...
Which one did you hear?
I got the Velvet Underground. I did some with the guitarist from No Age. I think it was the guitarist.
Oh, sweet. Yeah.
Which I was surprised to see because I hadn't heard much about that band in a while, but I saw them play over 10 years ago somewhere in Brooklyn. And they stuck with me a lot because it's guitar and drums.
Yeah.
And
you like the stripped down thing.
I like that a lot. And
yeah,
I think between like a band like the White Stripes, I learned so much about production because my initial instinct, if I want my guitars to sound big, let me record like 7 overdubs of guitars.
Right.
And maybe in the real world that gets much bigger. But when you're in the speakers in your DAW, you only get so loud. You only have so much space. So the more you add, the smaller everything becomes. So hearing a band like that, you would think, oh, it's going to be like thin and weak, and not at all.
No.
White Stripes too, like not at all. It's ginormous.
It really is.
And it's because they have all of that space where you can really just dive into it. I just released a podcast about this, how I think one of the reasons we get stuck so much in our work is we polish one part of it far too long. And then when we go to the next part, we have nothing and it feels really weak. Be like, filming a movie and you edited a CGI on the first opening scene and then you show up with your camera for the next scene and it's just so bare,
Yeah.
When you polish up like your drums so huge and then you got to add bass, guitar, keys, vocals, you got no room for it. But with a band like No Age, you can just make them huge because all you need is room for a guitar and a voice. And
are you a Yo La Tengo fan?
Yeah. Yeah, like on the periphery, I've always enjoyed them a bit, but I've never done the deep dive.
That's very, very rewarding. And they're a really good 3-piece, not always trying to go for largesse, but sometimes going for a very intimate sound, but they always sound bigger than 3.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that and thinking about their work.
Also, less moving parts because anyone who's creative has some sort of temperamental aspect to their personality. So
Yeah.
the more moving parts, the sooner you're going to break up.
I love that about being in a three-piece band right now. And there's only
Yeah.
two other people I have to work a schedule out with, and
Right.
there's only, and everyone has room. So if one person is maybe overplaying a little, you can kind of deal with it. You can work with it. You can allow
Imagine
them that
having
space.
imagine having to navigate a band like fucking Parliament Funkadelic or something like that, where can you believe that they lasted for 10 years? I mean, they basically were fully functioning to whatever degree for all that time, and there were just endless amounts of people on that stage.
That's got to be discipline and just really everyone tuned into the big picture.
Yeah.
Because so much of that music is reliant on space, like
Right.
funk music. Like you need the space.
Yeah.
That's where like the groove is, and the more people you put in there, the less of it you tend to have.
Yeah. Always. I mean, I don't know exactly how many people, but it was more than 10. I think like 14, maybe something like that. That's just fucking wild. Plus tons of, Emerson, Lake and Palmery sort of, proggy space affectations on that stage.
Yeah,
You gotta love it, man. I wish
I don't know.
I wish that was still a thing.
I think a lot about how in a three-piece band, there's never more than one conversation going on. You can't have two separate conversations with three people.
Yeah.
So you're always kind of dialed in. But as soon as you get an extra member, now there can be two separate conversations. And if in that band, there could be 7.
Yeah.
So to maintain focus is hard. And especially when you're developing a song that needs to have some sort of unified vision, if you're not all able to communicate about it together, it just must be really tough.
So do you think, being in a three-piece band, do you just happen to be in a three-piece band, or do you think, based on your experience, that 3 is now the magic number?
I like 3 for a lot of these reasons. I mean, as you get older, when you're in high school, you can have 5 people in your band. No one's got anything to do.
Yeah.
And you can just get together. No one's busy. No one's working, really, and everything. No families or nothing.
You had a high school job.
Yeah, but
What'd you do?
it was in high school. I worked at McDonald's.
Nice.
I got that job in 11th grade. I worked at a toy store also. McDonald's was the most efficient place I ever worked.
Was it KB Toys?
It was KB Toys.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, during the holiday season. I thought that was going to be a really cool job, but it was terrible.
Why?
Well, think about when you're at a store and you're looking for something on the shelves. You kind of like, maybe you're looking for like a record, you kind of like move them and you keep them in order, and you're aware they're gentle and valuable things. And a kid looking for the toy they want just throws them all off the shelf
Yeah.
until they find them. So the store is always a mess. And they always played this music. It was like a 45-minute tape. It was just a loop. And in between every song, there'd be kids like, "Hey, we're KB Kids, and we're here to celebrate the holidays with you." And you just heard that like 9 or 10 times every shift. Some of those songs I still can't listen to because of that tape.
I have to ask you, what percentage of the reason that you don't currently have kids is because of that job?
I don't know. Maybe. I never thought about that, but yeah, it was.
I had the worst fucking job when I was in high school. I had a few jobs, but this one in particular sounds like it's not even possible that there'd be a company formed about this. But so I was at my buddy Rick's place, and I read in the newspaper, it was one ad, it was summer after freshman year of college. "Hey, do you like to party? Are you crazy? Do you love music?" I was like, what the fuck? They're advertising my job in the one ad. And I go down there, and it's just a bunch of fold-out chairs set up, and a guy going, do you like making this kind of money? And then putting a 20 down, then a 50, then 100. And, they're not telling you what you're doing. They're just saying, do you like making this kind of money? The whole presentation.
Yeah.
So, a couple days of this. And finally, they say that the place is called Music Industries. And the whole deal is, by the way, CDs have already been invented. It's 1990, 91. And the whole idea is you're going to these pre-established actual appointments to people's homes to try to sell them a plan where they buy 1,000 cassette tapes in 10 years. Meanwhile, CDs, it's 1991.
Right.
Nobody's listening to tapes. The whole presentation, you hold up stuff like a mangled reel-to-reel, which at that point no one even knew what that was, and said, this will not do, that kind of stuff, broken record, to try to sell the idea of a tape. I went to one appointment, locked my keys in my car accidentally. The woman had to call the cops to get me in my car. That was the end of that job.
Do you like to party?
So yeah, I am in the music industry. The music industries, actually.
Yeah, right. The dark side.
That was the dark side.
It all shapes you, though, right? It gives you some
That's
idea.
the worst job I've ever had. I've had so many jobs.
Mm.
My ideology going into my life was I'm going to be a filmmaker, which I did. I made 2 films, so in that way it worked. But make sure you don't give yourself a way out. So everything, and that was the best I could do at the time. Like that was a solid perspective for me. So it had to be a burned bridge if it was a job.
Mm.
Every job had to just leave. Like no possible, can we call this guy and get a reference? No. You
That
cannot
must
call
have made
that
for
guy.
some interesting exits.
Yep.
That philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah, there was one in particular. I worked at a quiet storm station. You know that format?
No.
It's like, it's all birthed from an album by Smokey Robinson called The Quiet Storm, but it's like smooth jazz, that kind of stuff, like Kenny G.
Uh-huh.
And so, I'm there stoned to the fucking gills, wearing a pinstripe suit. I don't know why I had all these pinstripe suits that my dad had retired from when he was working. So, and I was the switchboard operator. So I was the front desk guy. Total square peg, round hole. And so I knew I was going to leave. And the woman who came in to water the plants, there was like kind of an attraction I could see. So the day that I knew I was going to never show up ever again, I took her downstairs and she gave me a hand job and I didn't clean up. And then on the marquee where I could put like letters on, I just wrote, bye.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that was the most graceful of all my exits.
Yeah. Whoa.
That story probably had the least to do with music of any story ever on your show, except for the fact that it was a radio station.
Well, and I guess if you want references for your work now, it's a cautionary tale.
Exactly.
Yeah, so much of it is about leaving behind good memories of yourself.
Yeah.
So people want to work with you again. But
Yeah, right.
I guess if you're trying to ensure that you have to focus on achieving your dreams, burning the bridges might be one way to go.
It was an excuse for some pretty dildo-y behavior, but also, I mean, at the time it just seemed like a solid worldview to me.
Yeah.
I realized in hindsight that I was, totally clueless, but what are you going to do? It still I have so many good stories as a result. Stories
We're all clueless.
None of which my son will ever hear.
Yeah, right. And I'm sure he'll come up with his own that his father will never hear either.
Yeah. He already has, I'm sure, at 4 years old.
Right. So, this is it's a great show, and I think it's perfect for anyone listening to this podcast. Discograffiti. I thought it was going to be Discograffiti when I first saw it.
I'm so glad you know how to pronounce it. Nobody does.
Discograffiti. It's cool. It's and I like the way that was like a thing. You have all these like great slogans and catchphrases. You're gonna do the spray can on this album. We're gonna, you know, you build it in really fun. It sounds as if you have background in radio and broadcasting the way you do it. I mean, the voice is there. The whole packaging, the promotion, the introductions, and the style of editing is all just really great.
Well, I really appreciate that. I think it's more than anything, it's the background in film. You know, I approach each thing like it's a film in that way.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. It's
Yeah.
funny how those things connect, and they translate to one another.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I've always been really creative. I mean, I when I was in 6th grade, I wrote a book, and then I wrote another book when I was 16. So I was always doing stuff, and then to get into college, all I had to do was walk in. I wanted to do early decision, Boston University. I walked in with a book I wrote. It was like a done deal. But I've always had a project going. I've always, you know, I think now more than ever, the world is just fucking insane. I've always tried to blot it out and listen and watch and read instead of, you know, I have a get in there and fuck shit up thing too, but I've always been a devout devourer of super cool cultural stuff, especially before internet. As you know, the organic discovery of stuff, of people talking to each other and, hey, have you heard this? And the novelty of that has never worn off of me. So, there's people out there in my Patreon sphere who, in some respects, know more than me. They're always introducing me to stuff, and ultimately, that's what I wanted to do. I mean, I like everyone else, I have friends that stopped talking about all the cool shit life has to offer and only want to talk about mortgages, taxes, the same old shit. And I want to still remain in my Arrested Development, so I got to recreate my friend circle. And so here we are.
Yeah, I agree. It's easy to get caught up in all that stuff, but all that bill paying, nonsense that we have to, the adult stuff, I try to get that out of my way as quickly as possible too, so I don't have to think about it as much. Yeah. I don't need to rehash it in conversation all day long.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help that this is the particular lazy Susan around which my brain spins. It's just always the same stuff. It's music and film for me are really the two poles. That's it.
Well, that's why it's great to have someone like you putting this project together. And I think if anyone can do it, I think we found the guy right here in you.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate that. And you too. I mean, what you do is extremely valuable. And, to be able to have all, I think it says a lot about your style as a showrunner that you really don't try to impose. For anyone listening to the show, I don't know if you make it public what you have on your page, but it's very liberating as a guest.
Good.
To see, this could be about anything. And a lot of people try to run their thing. I'm guilty as charged sometimes as well, to try to get a stranglehold on it out of fear that it, could derail. But that fear, that, not knowing what comes next, that is what creates greatness. And that's what you allow with your setup.
Well, thanks. It's definitely loose, and I'm trying to be open to things. Sometimes it is a little scary, but it works in a couple ways. It's not just like an altruistic thing where, you know, just the guests can talk about whatever they want, which is kind of the way I like to approach it. But it is probably the only way I could get it done as well. I don't think I could I know I couldn't do the research you're doing. I couldn't do all that pregame work. So like, that's why something like your show is so impressive to me as well. Just knowing what goes into this, even just to kind of do it in a relatively loose format, is still a lot of work. So
yeah, that guy
you're
from
clearly doing your homework.
The gentleman from Deer Tick, I don't think their management or their PR person had any idea what the show was, because they wanted a tape on Wednesday and they were throwing out, hey, how about we do Dr. John, or how about we do Steely Dan? And I was supposed to, in 36 to 48 hours, do my kind of research
Right.
on a band like that, which is, even if I was to do it nonstop, I would only get to like 1973 by that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, I set myself up for some, like, stomach in knots type moments, timing wise. But it's ultimately, that's the fun of it, is, to open yourself up to that kind of discovery with an artist. You get it, that understanding is an amazing feeling.
I'm glad we get to be the beneficiaries of your work.
Thank you.
So we can send people to discograffiti.com.
Nah, forget the website. It's a pile of shit. Just go.
Right,
just go. No, you can go there. You can go there. But anywhere where podcasts are streamed.
Yeah, it's very easy to find. I found it instantly.
Thank you.
Came up as soon as I got past the GR, and then there it was.
Yeah, sweet.
So cool. Dave, thanks so much for doing this. This has been a lot of fun.
Brian, I appreciate it, man. Please don't ever stop what you're doing.
You too. Although I would understand if you took a break for a week.
It's okay. Look, if you stockpile enough content, you can still release stuff and live a happy and balanced life. Fish.
Yeah. Well, I think you have the love and passion for it too, working in your favor. So that's a good thing.
And a very understanding wife.
Yes.
Yeah.
A very important ingredient that I don't spend enough time talking about as well. Oh, cool.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really, really appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk with you, man.
Same here. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that's listening. Enjoy your day.